Capella University, learning the right skills could make a difference. That's why our business programs teach you relevant skills you can take from the course room to the workplace. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
We've got new data that could change how we measure obesity in America. What would that do to the numbers of people that live with obesity? We're going to talk about a possible triple agonist in an oral form that's showing absorption rates that we've never seen in this class of medication. We're going to talk about one of our favorite gut-based procedures that just got brand new data that could show that you could actually hold your weight after discontinuing a GLP-1. And on top of that, we've got Zepbound cash pay prices reducing. We're going to get into that a little bit. And we're going to talk about the Alzheimer's study last week from Novo Nordisk. And we're going to put that all in perspective for you because I don't think you've heard the last on that topic. We're going to get into all this and more on this week's episode of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. Let's do it.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome to this week's edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Mounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are OTP on the Pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound compound. It's what we talk about each and every week here as we share patient-centric obesity medicine news that empowers you to have more competent and confident conversations with your doctor. If you're new here, welcome. Hit the subscribe. If you're listening on the podcast, give it a 5-star rating and review. All those things train the algorithm to tell it that this content is valuable. And every day, more and more people are discovering what we're doing here at On the Pen. Millions of views monthly across all platforms. And I want to thank you for helping us grow this into the first patient-centric obesity medicine news platform. We're building it together. But this is some crazy news out of Harvard Mass General, where they're saying that by their calculations, almost 7 out of 10 adults qualify as having the disease of obesity when you actually measure the body correctly. Now, BMI has always been this sort of, well, within our community, it's been one of those things that people have looked at with differing opinions. It's been a little bit controversial because it takes your height and your weight and then it spits out a number and it says you're either obese or you're not. But it does nothing to consider things like your muscle mass and your body composition. That's why adding waist circumference to the BMI, which is your sort of waist to hip ratio, could help to actually qualify who is actually obese and who is not compared to the old standard BMI. So when they did this at Harvard and Mass General, they actually found that the people who were adults that met this criteria for obesity leapt from around 43% to almost 69%. That's like 7 out of 10 adults. Millions of people who were once not classified as obese would be classified as obese. And I want to just take a moment to put this into context because one of the things I've received some flack for online over the last couple of weeks is I made a video and I said, you know, you would almost be crazy not to consider GLP-1 at this point for most people. Most people should probably be considering at least having a conversation with their doctor about that. 7 out of 10, by my calculation, is most people. I mean, this is a huge deal. So when we add things like waist circumference to the BMI, I think that helps to give a little bit of context and actually puts more people into that category where, hey, you want to definitely get things into check before the wheels come off metabolically. Listen, if I would have had the chance, knowing what I know now about how these medications have been proven to help people avoid getting type 2 diabetes if they're pre-diabetic, you better believe I would have been all over this. So this is some really interesting information. We'll have to get into this a little bit deeper on the Substack this week, but I wanted to lead with this because millions of people out there who are probably walking around and feeling like their body's fighting against them, but the BMI might look normal, right? The study could actually be validation for some of those people that are feeling the effects of food noise, that are feeling the effects of metabolic dysregulation, because in the end, the BMI is just not the greatest tool. So curious to know if you guys have seen this one. If you haven't, we'll get into it a little bit deeper at obesity.news later this week. Of course, everything that we mentioned in terms of links on the podcast can be found at otplinks.com. That's why we leave this up here for you at the bottom of the screen if you're watching on YouTube or if you're watching on X. Now, this is an interesting one. We led off talking about a new oral triple agonist. And this is from a company called Ascletis, ASCLETIS. I'm not quite sure how to say this, but the molecule is ASC37. And this is one that is a triple agonist targeting GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon receptors. And that sounds familiar to you. It sounds familiar because that's what retatrutide does. Retatrutide, which will be coming along sometime probably 2027 on the market. Of course, by my calculation at this point, it's hundreds of thousands of people are already taking knockoff versions of this from the gray market around the web to varying degrees of success. It's very interesting to follow the conversation. You know, about a week ago, I lost my TikTok account. Thankfully, we got it back. You know, I'm fatigued of even keeping track with my own what I've lost and what I've gotten back. I mean, who cares at this point? We know we're here. We know we're loud enough, and we know we're bigger than just one silly platform that decides to discriminate against the content that we do. But I digress. One of the things that happened to me is I had to start a backup account. When I started this backup account, I was thrust into this new algorithm on TikTok, and it was terrifying. It was terrifying. Why was it terrifying, Dave? Well, it threw me into the peptide world immediately on TikTok. And immediately two things. Immediately, I was just super pissed because I was like, you're telling me that this type of content where people are selling gray market retatrutide, in some cases, these were kids, like very obviously like a 15, 16-year-old kid who was talking about ratatouille, unabated, while, we have spent the last 3 years trying to build a respected, trusted platform where we're very careful about what we share and how we share it. And always encouraging people to just have better conversations with their medical provider. So the gray market is outside of any regulation. It's outside of any of the checks and balances we have, like a written prescription from a doctor, right? It is what it is, right? And no knock to people who decide that they're going to try that because that's their only hope. I'm not talking about them, but I am talking about 15-year-olds on TikTok hawking this stuff, which is just wild. Wild that algorithm is not smart enough to pick up on that, yet we lose our account. But I digress. So retatrutide is the first triple agonist to be nearing phase 3 clinical trial ending. We got one ending pretty soon, actually, in with a primary endpoint of reducing pain in osteoarthritis of the knee, I believe, to be specific. We're going to get that data soon, right? Which is very exciting. And this one is an oral version that follows those same receptors, targets those same receptors. And here's some of the early signals that we've seen in primates. So this is preclinical. It's obviously in animal studies right now. But the oral bioavailability is at 4.2%. That's 9 times higher than tirzepatide. It's 30 times higher than semaglutide. It's 6 times higher than retatrutide. 57 times higher drug exposure than oral retatrutide and a half-life around 56 hours. Strong in vitro receptor activation than retatrutide across all 3 targets, and it's early, but these are some astounding numbers, again, as reported by Ascletis, the company that's making this. Now, I don't know if they've done anything to the peptides to make them more oral bioavailable, or if they're just raw dogging the peptides orally. How they're doing it, I don't know, but this seems to be a pretty intense claim that this oral version of this triple agonist has some real bioavailability. And when you talk about the potential of targeting these 3 things, and we know what injectable retatrutide does in terms of being just a metabolic game changer, it's easily will be, once it's approved, assuming it is, it will be the most powerful metabolic modulating drug to ever hit the market. So we get excited when we hear about this stuff. If you want to look it up on your own, the molecule is ASC37, the oral triple agonist from Ascletis. One to watch for sure. Now, just this morning, there was some awesome news that dropped. We've been talking for months and months and months about, well, actually, we're getting up on a year, the first time we had the CEO of Fractal Health on our channel. And Fractal is a company that is developing a few endoscopic, minimally invasive outpatient procedures that are pretty exciting to watch. One of them is this program called the Revita program. And it's in a study right now called Reveal 1, where they've enrolled people who have lost at least 24% of their body weight on a GLP-1 and then stopped. Sorry, I shouldn't have said at least. I should have said an average of 24% of their body weight. And once they get to this 24%, they stop the injections altogether. And then they receive one Revita procedure. No maintenance drugs, just one minimally invasive outpatient procedure. This is the mucosal relining of the duodenum. At 6 months, and this is the data we got today, at 6 months, the average weight in those patients had changed 1.5%, so minimally, a minimal change in weight. Where when you look at the clinical trials for the injectable drugs, when people go off treatment, they regain close to 10% of their body weight by this 6-month mark. The HbA1c markers in these patients barely moved, and the safety was clean. So it's huge data today from Fractal Health, which continues to show that life beyond the pen, life off the pen, we talk about being on the pen here at On the Pen, life off the pen may be very attainable for some people. Now, I know the number one question that people have about this is, does this remove food noise? I'm sure that Fractal is looking at this. I think we asked Harith on the last time a few months ago when we had him on about this, and they are looking at measuring food noise, so we should get some answers to that. I don't know. I know, like, food noise is, listen, I'm going to digress a little bit for a minute. You know, I went off Zepbound or Mounjaro at the beginning of November to go on Wegovy. The idea was that I wanted to take the 7.2 that'll be coming out in a couple months, the higher doses, just to see if I responded better. And so I went off it for a week in anticipation of the new script for Wegovy. The Wegovy was delayed by a few days, so it was like 12, almost even 2 weeks between my last Mounjaro injection and the Wegovy 2.4. And I'm telling you, even once I took the Wegovy, by the end of that 3rd week, first of all, I had already gained like 7 or 8 pounds, probably mostly inflammation. But the Wegovy did nothing. I mean, nothing. It was almost like I injected nothing. By that 3rd week, I was terrified. And by the 4th week, I was like, we're going back on Mounjaro. I can't do this. My hunger, the hunger signals, and I'm not even talking about food noise, because I think about food noise as something that happens in the brain mostly, just the thoughts of food, your inability to escape those thoughts. What am I going to eat? When am I going to eat? How much am I going to eat? Where am I going to eat? All those things, even maybe while you're eating, right? And I've experienced that in life. This was just more of like an animalistic style hunger that was terrifying. I mean, it's like, whoa. And what I equate it to is like, if you've ever done a really rigorous workout, like a ton of cardio or maybe a really heavy lift. And I don't know about you guys, but once I do that, my hunger is through the roof. I'm just like ravenous. And that is how I felt for like the last month. And so I'm back on Mounjaro, never again. I don't care. I can't imagine the 7.2 milligram dose of Wegovy is going to put a dent in the way that it felt to go off Mounjaro. And it's interesting because I've done this switch before. Maybe it's been a couple years maybe now. Maybe not quite that long, but going off of Mounjaro and onto Ozempic I did gain a little bit of weight in that time, which eventually came back off with the Mounjaro, but I did not experience the hunger this way. And so it was just wild and terrifying. So I digress, but that's always a question people have about the Fractal Health procedures, whether we're talking about Revita or we've talked about the Rejuva program, which is actually a gene therapy that will be looking at increasing your endogenous GLP-1 and GIP. That one I think would help probably with food noise. But the whole idea is just to get yourself signaling right again, to get your gut that's dysfunctioning. We've always known ever since we got into the science of this, like, this makes sense. There's hormonal dysregulation going on. And the hypothesis of Fractal is if we can restore that signaling properly, we can help people maintain their weight loss. And so that's really exciting, I think, for the idea of having a minimally invasive outpatient procedure that can get you off the pen and help you to maintain that weight loss so that you're not reliant on the pen for your whole life. Now, with the cost coming down on these things, and that's the next segment that we'll get into, it'll be maybe less of a big deal for some people, but not everybody wants to be on a shot for life. And so I think this is a really exciting thing to look at with Fractal Health. We sent out a Substack article about that earlier today at obesity.news. Make sure you're signed up there for your email alerts to get all this breaking news when it happens. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Shed. If any of these medications sound intriguing to you, if getting on the pen sounds like something that might be a benefit to you as someone living with the disease of obesity, I highly recommend you check out our partners at Shed. They're the headline sponsor of the podcast here. You can go to tryshed.com and use code OTP25 to save 25%. But more importantly, TriShed is going to connect you with a provider that has the ability to prescribe the medications that we talk about on this channel when they are medically necessary. They're going to be able to point you in the right direction of the right support products that you may need on your journey to deal with the things that come along with this, because there's no free lunch. Anytime you start a new medication, it typically comes with some set of side effects, something. There's always a trade-off, right? And you should be aware of the fact that there are trade-offs, and all of that information be available at tryshed.com within a couple of clicks. And check it out. Our partners at Shed make this podcast possible, so give them some love in the comments of the video as well. We thank them for their belief in what we're doing here, bringing patient-centric obesity medicine news. Now, if you're interested in the Zepbound vials, because that's the news story we're going to talk about, those are available through Shed. The cash pay Wegovy, the cash pay Zepbound, all available through the Shed platform if you're trying to get access. Of course, you can also get access if you want to through your primary care provider who can write these prescriptions, but not everybody's primary care is open to this. I saw a stat this past week that many people who are on a GLP-1 aren't even telling their primary care doctor. Probably a pretty good indication that you're with the wrong doctor to begin with if you don't even feel like you can be open with that doctor and honest about a medicine that you're taking. But I digress. Again, a lot of digressing today. Kind of the mood that I'm in, I guess. But yeah, the Zepbound vials, we saw some price decreases this week starting yesterday. You can get the Zepbound vials for as low as $299 a month for the starting dose of 2.5 milligrams of Zepbound, which is an exciting drop in price there. Now, the previous price was $349, so that's a drop of $150. But with the 5 milligram dose, you were paying $499. Now you're going to pay $399. So the 5 milligram dose gives you a $100 discount. The rest of the doses, 7.5 through 15, are going to go down from $499 to $449. Here's the good news. We did an informal poll on the YouTube channel yesterday, and I asked, is this enough to move the needle to get you off of compound and onto the branded? And most people said no. And the follow-up question was, if not, and I kind of sensed that the answer from the community was going to be no for most people, what would the price have to be in order to get you to come down off of the compound and onto the branded, which I think is the goal of Lilly here. And most people said between $200 and $300. If it was between $200 and $300, I would go for the branded every time. Now, the interesting thing here is over the next 24 months, the most favored nations agreement does say that the cost of these medications will come down to $250 a month over the next 24 months. So if true, what does that do to compounds? Ultimately, I think you'll see a reduction in the price of the compounds, and at that point, they'll really be competing. And so then I wonder how that changes for people. If the compounds become $150 a month, do you still go to the compound or do you go to the branded? Because ultimately, every move that pharma makes, there will be an equal or opposite reaction, you would think, from the compound industry. Now, do these price changes move the needle on the price of compounds currently? I don't really think so, because I think people, by and large, are pretty uninformed about their options. I was pretty shocked, even within our own community, at the number of responses I got to the Lilly Direct price change, at the number of people who didn't realize that their doctor could prescribe it, who didn't realize that this was even an option. So, I think that a lot of the marketing that exists out there relies on people not really being that informed, which is why I do believe that you need to hit that thumbs up button right now, and you need to give the podcast a 5-star rating and review. All of those things are actually going to help to tell the algorithm that this is content that's worth getting out there, because ultimately we want you to have more competent and informed conversations with your doctor. And of course, understanding what those options are is part of that, whether it's compounded options or whether it's branded options, whatever it may be. And we support anybody who is working with their doctor to find the right solution. We want your care for the treatment of your obesity to be treated like a disease. You would go to a doctor for any other disease, and you would have that be a physician-led experience with your input and your knowledge and your desire to get better. And so anytime somebody is working with their doctor to get better health, we support whatever it is they want to try to get to where they want to be from a health standpoint. So being informed is a huge part of that. And so I want you all to be just doing your part to train the algorithm, because we got to get this message out. We're going to have a really big announcement on another tool, another huge resource that we're going to be offering the community, specifically the Medicare community, in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. Put Medicare in the chat if you are interested in what that may be. Some of you may already even know if you've been on some of my TikTok lives that we've been doing. The last story I want to get into is a story that we've talked about sort of ad nauseum through the different social media platforms over the last week. Well, we got some data from Novo Nordisk on their Alzheimer's trial, the EVOKE and EVOKE Plus trial, and we knew that didn't shake out the way that we wanted it to, in terms of really showing that it was superior to placebo and slowing the progression of Alzheimer's. Now, I want to give this a little caveat, because I've seen a lot of really what's the word I'm looking for? I've seen a lot of reporting on this in the mainstream media that lacks the nuance that this conversation deserves. The first thing is, by estimation, Novo Nordisk spent $700 million, 70% of $1 billion, on what some people call the lottery ticket. A really expensive. If it works, it's going to pay off huge. If it doesn't, it's a bust for the company. First of all, I want to say kudos to Novo Nordisk for running this trial. And I want to give a little bit of context into why I think this isn't the last word that we're going to hear on GLP-1s. And I don't think it's the last word we're going to hear from Novo Nordisk. The reason is, and I think it's so important for people to understand, that this was a Rybelsus trial. This was a 14 milligram oral version of semaglutide. So this wasn't even a very potent version of semaglutide. And you might say, why wouldn't they just do, like Wegovy, 2.4 milligrams, and see if that works? And I think it's really important to understand that this is one of those trials where weight loss is not the goal. You want all of the cardiovascular benefits. You want all of the benefits in terms of reducing insulin resistance in the body and all those things that they believe could contribute, from a vascular perspective and an amyloid plaque buildup perspective in the brain, all of these things that it seems pretty clear that GLPs have the ability to touch upon, but weight loss is not the goal. In fact, weight management in terms of maintaining a healthy weight, a high enough weight, is a big challenge in this population. Of course, there are people living with obesity within the Alzheimer's population, but by and large, it's an elderly population where it's a little bit more difficult to manage the weight. So if you completely turn off their hunger signals as well, that might not be ideal for most of the population. And so you almost have to have a weaker version that doesn't target the weight loss as much. And I think that's where they do Rybelsus. And they didn't even try the higher doses like they have with oral Wegovy, which will be coming out in the next 6 or 8 months. So I wanted to give that perspective. I think the positive thing is we do see Lilly and Novo moving in the directions of developing molecules that maybe touch less on the weight loss, but still touch on the GLP-1 pathway or the incretin pathways or the amylin pathways in ways that don't necessarily knock out the appetite as much as they knock down the desire for maybe other things. So we were talking about brenipatide a few weeks ago from Eli Lilly is the main one that comes to mind in terms of brenipatide and being a GIP receptor agonist. It's a straight GIP receptor agonist, as I recall, that's designed to target neurological issues like alcohol dependency, opioid dependency, and even asthma, which there's a neurological component to, believe it or not. And so all of those things would be things where you're trying to target that area of the brain that turns off the noise, whatever that may be, but doesn't necessarily turn off the desire to consume food, because that's not the primary goal. And so you'll see this evolve over time, and we'll continue to follow this stuff as well, because this is hugely meaningful. And so I just want to reiterate my gratitude to Novo Nordisk for being brave enough to take the chance and to take this shot at Alzheimer's, which really I think gives data, important data moving forward. And you definitely, mark my words today, write it down, Tuesday, December 2nd. We need to get a little journal where we can start writing this stuff down. But you have not heard the end of Alzheimer's research in GLP-1. You just haven't. And kudos to Novo Nordisk for being the first and the bravest to spend the money to do this. This was an excellent trial, even though it didn't hit exactly what we hoped that it would. So I wanted to just mention that again before we put this study to bed. There will be more data on this in the coming weeks, but didn't hit its primary endpoint. I want to thank Shepa, who has helped me to continue to be engaged in my health, even though things have been going the wrong direction. I've been in the gray zone for a few weeks now that I went off the Mounjaro, but I've been engaged. I've been still stepping on the scale. I'm not going to lie, it's been a little bit tough to step in the gray zone every day. I'm just trying to get back to that green, but it hasn't been demoralizing like the scale has, because I would have given up on that thing 3 weeks ago and not stepped on it for another month, and perhaps not even been as proactive about making the change to switch back to Mounjaro as I was with this one. I'm like, I got to get it back in the green. And so I really do think that there's something magical now, having experienced all the zones, the blue zone, the really great weight loss, and the dark gray for one day. So I've been all over, so I see how it affects both ways. And the Shepa scale continues to be a magical way to sort of decouple this idea of the numbered scale, right? Which just really messes with my brain. So when I'm engaged with the scale, I'm engaged with my health. And when I'm on a numbered scale, it's fickle. And then I get fickle about stepping on it. I step on the Shepa scale almost every day when it's feasible for me to do so. Some mornings are a little bit crazy. Getting 4 kids ready for school. They have to be at school at 8 a.m., so we're up at like 6:30 in the morning. And sometimes I just don't get on the scale before I eat something, and I don't like to do that. So every now and again I miss it, but I'm engaged with this thing in a way that I never engaged with the numbered scale, especially during severe weight fluctuations. So want to thank them for being a sponsor. If you want to check out them, you can check out the Shepa scale at home.myshepa.com/OTP. And if you use code OTP30, you can save 30% on the Shape of Scale. And everything that we talked about here is available at otplinks.com. That's going to help you be the gateway to a lot of resources, not only the exclusive discounts that our partners offer, but it's going to be a great gateway to all the resources that we talk about on this, savings cards, etc. And oh yeah, we have some savings card information coming in the coming days from Eli Lilly. So hold tight. We're going to have that for you. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell for notifications, and do all the things because we're going to have a huge update on the savings card in the coming days. Mark my words. Make sure that you hit the like, hit the bell, hit the sub, train the algorithm, because you are not going to want to miss this time-sensitive update. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. I couldn't, wouldn't, and shouldn't do it without you. Until the next one, we'll catch you later.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.